I was looking through a big box of my family's history, and I found a letter written to future generations. I found the letter interesting. What could be so important about my particular family that made my distant relative want to write about it? I already knew that my family had a shoe store at some point in time, but that's about all I knew about my family's history. What I found was that the Kroger family had a big impact in the small town of Seward. This story starts when Carl Frederick Kroger was born in Bonn, Germany on June 17, 1849. Carl immigrated to the U.S. in 1865 at the age of 16. His grandson Oscar wrote that he immigrated because America was looked upon as the land of opportunities. He also stated that back then they believed that if you worked hard, sooner or later you'd get rich. Carl left Bonn and went on a 5-week boat trip that was long and perilous. Many people died because of insufficient food sources. The boat also sprung a leak, which passengers had to deal with also. Eventually, they made it to Cleveland, Ohio. Carl then met Sophia Rost in Cleveland, and they got married in 1870. Carl and Sophia moved to Middle Creek, Nebraska for a promise of free land in the Midwest. Carl then moved to Seward, Nebraska to try farming in 1871. They lived in a small dugout. Oscar remembers his grandmother talking about how the family was sitting at the table eating supper one evening, and a snake dropped down from the ceiling of the dugout and onto the table. She said it ruined her appetite, and Oscar said he thinks it would ruin his appetite too. The family soon found out that they were unsuccessful at farming. According to Oscar, the little food they raised, the grasshoppers got. It was also a bad year to move because it was a drought year. Carl decided he needed to find another way to provide for the family in Seward. Carl opened his home to some fellow German Lutherans for worship services. In this act of kindness, many things were to happen. The German Lutherans knew that Carl was struggling with farming. They also knew that he had some experience in shoemaking. There wasn't a shoe store in the greater area, so they convinced Carl to open Kroger's Shoeland. In the early years of the shop, Carl would hand make all the shoes. He needed leather, so he would take regular trips to Nebraska City. The town of Seward was not a big town. It was only 4 years old when Carl moved there. The town did not have any trains, so Carl would walk to fetch leather. He would return back to Seward a week later, carrying leather on his back. After 25 years of hand-making shoes, they were able to get shipments of new shoes. The shipments included brands that were popular back then, including a Kansas City brand of shoes, McElroy Sloan's Shoes. As you can see by this poster, the shoes were a popular brand, and the shop would advertise them and the store. Carl's son, Oscar H., Charlie, and Paul joined in the business, and so did their sons Oscar Allen, Vic, and Herb. Kroger's Shoeland was a family business. We can learn what working in the shop was like because of a letter written by Oscar Allen Kroger. He came into the business at the tender age of 10 in 1922. He was drafted into the business for he would tease his sister. So they took him to the store. Oscar wanted a bicycle, so he would work for 25 cents a day to save up for it. His cousin Herb came into the business around the same age as him. They would have fun riding the rolling ladders that ran across the shelves of the shoe store. The boys would sort buttons until they were old enough to do different jobs like selling shoelaces and polish. Then he started selling children's shoes. Once, Oscar couldn't seem to get the shoe on the child's foot. After several minutes, the parents patiently pointed out that he was trying to put the left shoe on the right. After mastering selling children's shoes, he was on the floor selling shoes with the rest of them, and he has been at it ever since. The Krogers affected the town of Seward in multiple ways. Firstly, Seward gained its first Lutheran church 7 years after Carl and his family moved there. A quote from the history of Seward, Nebraska states that little did C.F. Kroger family realize what they were starting in 1870 when they opened up their home for worship services. That group has now grown to a congregation of 2,300 resident members. The book also states that it is one of the largest Lutheran congregations in the United States. In the book, The History of Seward County, Nebraska, the article on Carl says that Mr. Kroger is an energetic businessman and a splendid type of German-American citizenship. You can see that Carl had a positive effect on Seward, for he had made multiple appearances in the history of Seward County, Nebraska. Another way the Krogers affected the town is opening the first shoe store in Nebraska. According to an article by Ashley Anderson, Kroger Shoeland was the oldest shoe store in the United States under ownership of one family. The store also had many locations, moving to the most recent in 1937. Along with location changes, the name changed also. You might be wondering why there are so many different spellings of the Kroger name. The name was originally Kroger with an umlaut over the O. In American language, the umlaut does not exist, so the name became Kroger. Many people mispronounce the name. Instead of the OE sound the umlaut makes, they pronounce it like Kroger. While making the title for the store, he got advised to make it easier to pronounce, so he started spelling it as Kroger. The store also had multiple names: C.F. Kroger Boots and Shoes, Kroger Bros, Kroger Shoes, Kroger Shoeland. Many things have changed in the actual business also. For instance, the actual shoes have changed. The shoe materials used to be all leather. They were more for style than comfort. Nowadays, the materials are softer and more flexible. The shoes used to be sealed with nails or sewed together, but now they use cement to get them together. The customers have also become more widespread than back then. People traveled by horse and buggy, mainly, as they couldn't go far, whereas nowadays people can travel in much larger distances. People come to the store from 30 and 40 miles away. Although the business saw many new customers, they still see people who bought their shoes as children. One woman told Herb that she had come to the store as a little girl, taking the train to buy new shoes. Also, the prices have changed. Big chain companies offered cheaper prices for shoes, attracting more customers. Unfortunately, Kroger Shoeland was sold in 2003. Without the money of abundant customers, the most current owners of the shop, Dave and Cheryl, had to give up some of their personal savings to keep the store alive. They decided to close the store November 10th, 2003. My grandfather sent an email notifying my father and his brothers that the shoe store would be no more. He said that he hated to see the end of a business that had been in existence for 132 years, but he was glad that Dave and Cheryl wouldn't have to be under that stress anymore. But we can still see how much the Kroger family has changed Seward. As Marvin Kroger wrote in our family history, the Kroger family played a vital role in the early years of our country and continues this role to the present day. May our children of tomorrow and of centuries to come proudly carry our name.